Alright, welcome to the next video. Today we're going to talk about lenses. So as you can see, I've got a few of them in front of me. Didn't bring out everything, I don't have enough table space for that, but I'm just bringing out like a little selection of each that I've got. I think you're going to get the idea. There's some lenses out there, specialty lenses that I don't have yet, but I will one day. So lenses, why do we need all of these different lenses when, if you remember in the last video, or one of the last videos, we talked about those compact cameras and those bridge cameras where they have a huge zoom range. They can go from 28 to 600. That was my example that I showed here on the whiteboard. Why would I want to have one of those lenses or one of those all-in-one cameras that has its own lens built in when I said that having all of these different lenses was the way to go? Why would that be when I have this big behemoth here that clearly costs a lot of money, and then I've got, these little guys, whoa, they're not that fragile, don't worry. These little guys here, this is a kit lens. Now we can start with that one because this is probably similar to the lens that came with your camera. This one happened to come with the Sony that I'm shooting on now, and usually they come with this little lens hood, and you can just take it off, flip it around, and there you've got this cute little lens, super lightweight. This thing hardly weighs anything. It's so tiny too, And this is for a full frame camera. That Sony right there is a full frame camera, and we're going to get into sensor size a little bit later on, but just know there's like full frame, which is fairly big, not literally this big, and then there's APS-C, and there's micro four thirds, and there's your little phone. They have a really teeny tiny sensor on these, and there's bigger ones than full frame. You got medium format, large format. Anyway, there's other things, but today we're talking about lenses, so don't let me get too distracted on other things. Let's talk about lenses. And the first thing we're going to talk about is that guy right there. That is going to be your kit lens. What do they mean by kit lens? That means that it came in your camera kit. So when you buy a camera, like I bought this Sony here recently, when you buy it off the shelf, a lot of times at the camera store it'll come with its own lens. So it came with this lens. You can buy them body only, save a few bucks. Happened to be that that's the only one they had in stock, and I don't know if you know this about me yet or not, but I can't wait. I need stuff yesterday. So I couldn't wait, so I bought one with a lens that I'll never use. I think I did shoot like 3 pictures on it just to say I did, I guess. Like I said, impatient. The problem with this lens is a lot of things, really. It's a 28 to 70. I also have a 24 to 70 here. This is a much better lens. This one, we're going to talk about aperture, but the aperture is 3.5 to 5.6. So what that means is it's variable aperture. At your widest open, if you're zoomed all the way out at 28 millimeters, you can go all the way down to 3.5. But if you zoom in to 70 millimeters here, you are going to have your maximum aperture changed to 5.6. And that really sucks. When you're shooting in manual mode and this is, zooming in and out is changing one of your 3 settings. You have ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. This is changing one of those if you're trying to shoot wide open. If you're trying to gather the most amount of light, you're shooting in a dark environment, low light environment, this thing is not going to be your friend. These typically have cheaper glass on them, and they're just, generally speaking, fairly low quality lenses. There we go. Okay, so let's put that away. We don't really need to talk about that much anymore. Basically, these are going to be kind of a poor quality, a negative. They're not great lenses, but they will get you by, they'll get you started, and that's probably what you've got now. You're probably shooting on a kit lens, you're saying, Oli, you're bashing my lens, man. That hurts my feelings, and I don't mean to hurt your feelings, but these kit lenses, they just get you started, but they don't get you down the road very far. They're okay, you'll get by for a minute, but like I said, I made it like 15 minutes before. I went and upgraded to the lens I'm shooting on now, which is an amazing lens. We've got the kit lens is almost always going to be a zoom lens. So let's dive into that next. Let's talk about zoom lenses. Now, a zoom lens has a focal range. And your kit lens is typically going to be a zoom lens. I haven't seen one yet that's not, but maybe there is, because I don't know everything. Now, a focal range is your millimeters to greater millimeters, right? So it's going to have a smaller millimeter number to a bigger millimeter number. For example, you've got a 24 to 70, which is super common. You have a 70, these are millimeters, millimeters, right? 70 millimeters to 200 millimeters. And these can be used to describe one aspect of your lens. This tells us that it'll zoom from a fairly wide shot to a fairly telephoto shot. We're going to get into that in a little bit here too, and what that means. But basically, you have a zoom lens which has a variable. So you basically have a bunch of different lenses just by turning the barrel, or some of them are a push-pull design. So by changing from 24 to 70 millimeters and anything in between, you can change the perspective of your lens. Now, I have a little cheat sheet that you guys can download at equinephotoschool.com, but I'm going to show you here real quick, just like my lovely art drawings. We're going to call this a camera here, right? Whoops, I don't know what this is. Bear with me, folks. All right, there's your little camera, top-down view, and let's just put a lens on it, right? We'll just say this is a general, description of a lens here, and we're looking this direction, right? So here's your lens. Now, on the end of this lens is a little glass here. If we're looking at, say, a 20 millimeter lens, we're going to be shooting very, very wide. But if we go to a little bit narrower, we're looking at maybe 70, right? And if we're looking even narrower than that, maybe we're 300 millimeters. Okay? So that's like how wide of an angle to a telephoto to a more narrow of a view. This is like your viewing angle. And then as we do that, the background becomes closer. So let's say at 24 millimeters, you've got a shot. This is inside your camera, right? And you've got these mountains here. You've got some trees here. You got a little river, whatever, right? But then as you go to like 70 millimeters, you still have the same frame, but now these mountains are coming in much closer, and then this tree is, much closer, and then this river is sneaking through here out of the frame. So you're going from like having these little tiny trees and little stuff, and these mountains are really far away, to now they're a lot closer. And then maybe if you go in again, you've got the same, frame here, but now we're at 300 millimeters. That's our millimeters here. Now we just see like one big peak here, and then maybe this tree is like very, very much this big tree, and that's all you can see. You can't even see the river anymore because you're aimed up at these mountains. You're very tight. You're very much narrowed in. So for example, what you're seeing here on this camera is roughly 50 millimeters. That's what we're shooting with right there. But we are kind of zoomed in. This is called zooming from 24 to 70. And that's a zoom lens, right? That makes sense. I think a lot of people are probably familiar with it because your kit lens is a zoom lens. The other thing we've got, prime lens is a single focal length. For example, we have 100 millimeter. We might have a 24 millimeter. We might have And I mean, it could be anything. We could have a 300 millimeter. We could have anything, you name it. Holler out some, right? I'm sure you're there. So 50. I've got a 50 millimeter sitting here. I got 50 millimeters. Anyway, the point is, there's no range here. It's not 50 to 100. It's just 50. It's not 24 to 70. It's just 24. So you're just locked in at 24. What's nice about that is you typically get better glass. You get a better front element, you get better internal glass. Everything is nicer. There's less compromises when you're not zooming. When you zoom, you have to start having compromises in image quality. You've got compromises in aperture. These typically have a bigger maximum aperture because it's easier with physics. It's physically easier to create a bigger aperture with a single focal length than it is to try to maintain that aperture over a large focal length or focal range. So these are probably your most common. Everybody's probably shot with a zoom lens. These tend to be more expensive. I think, yeah, that's kind of a negative. And you know, why wouldn't I just go with a zoom range with the maximum amount of zoom range? And we're going to get into that and all the details here in just a second. But basically, the more focal range that you have there, the less quality of glass. As a big picture kind of overview topic, just to kind of get a, you know, to start wrapping your heads around this concept, these are going to be lower quality lenses than these prime lenses. A prime lens with a single focal length, the engineers that made that can put in the highest quality glass with the least number of compromises. They really are spectacular, and I really love prime lenses. But you'll see here I've got a good mixture of both. I'm always using a little bit of everything. This is my big money maker here. It's also my biggest lens that I currently own. I've had a 600 mil lens before, but this is a 300 mil. This is a 120 to 300 at f2.8 all the way through, if to be more specific. So this is a zoom lens, and we're going to get into all these different kinds of lenses. But this is a zoom lens. This is a zoom lens. These 2, 3, 4, 5 of these are prime lenses. 6. These are all prime lenses here. This is another zoom. This one's a zoom lens. And that kit lens, also zoom lens. So I got a pretty good mixture of both. We're going to talk about these in a minute, but let me just finish up what we're talking about here before we get into that. Now we've got all of these different kinds of lenses. Your kit lens is usually a zoom lens, but you got zooms and primes. Those are your two big categories of lenses, the big main ones. As a subcategory on zoom lenses here, we've got, let's just put it here, subcategory. This is shorthand for subcategory today. We have super zoom lenses. For example, we have a lens out there that is a 16 to 400 millimeter. Now, this lens has a variable aperture. It's bound to. It's also really cheap. This thing's like $600 or something. We'll get into some pricing here on some of these different lenses, but these super zoom lenses, they're good for some things. They're good for travel photography. They're good for beginners that haven't really figured out what this focal length thing means, and they know that if they buy this lens, it covers all of these lenses and then some. And instead of buying all these lenses and investing a ton of money, you're not sure about photography, whatever, that's a good way to go. It's a good upgrade from your kit lens, upgrade to a super zoom lens. You know, you got daylight to, you got the sun as your light source. You can get away with a little bit smaller aperture, which is these ones will have. And it's fine. They're not very artistic. They're not purpose-built. They're general. Some people that travel, and you can only take one lens with you traveling, that's a good way to go. It's okay. They're poor quality glass. There's positives and negatives here. But from my experience, I had one of those. It was the older version of the 16 to 400, but it got me by. I made some money with it. I shot some team roping with it. It was great. It was a good little lens. It got me by. And then I was able to save up and buy a nice quality zoom lens. Like, I think I bought this 170 to 200. An older version of this I bought, and a different brand too. I went with a cheap brand there to start with. And then, later on, when I got to be more artistic and I wanted purpose-built lenses to do a specific job, and money was less of a problem, virtually, whatever. When money is not so much of a problem and you need to create a very specific image, go for a prime lens, and they will not let you down. It is glorious, but start here, then maybe go there. And then once you get some more money, then start going into these zoom lenses, and then your prime lenses are really, really cool, but you got to really know what you're buying before you, dish out a couple $1,000 for a prime lens, and then you go to shoot the thing that you thought you were going to shoot with it, and it was the wrong one for the job, and it just doesn't work, so that's a bummer. So make sure you understand what you're doing here. We will go like this. We have macro lenses. And I say that because macro lenses are usually, in my experience, the good ones anyway. There's some lenses that have a macro capability that are a zoom lens, but they're typically not true macro lenses. True macro lenses will get you a 1-to-1 ratio on your sensor. So what does that mean? You might think that they should call these micro because they're zooming in really, really tight. But what it means is, say you're shooting a picture of something small. In this case, let's talk about a bug. And it looks like this, right? And this is actual size. So let's pretend this is the actual size of the bug. Okay? And then we take a picture of this bug, and this is our sensor, camera sensor inside of the camera body. This is our sensor, and it makes this bug look exactly, the bug shows up the same exact, let's pretend that's the same exact size, actual size. If you think about this, what you're seeing now is me projected through this wide angle lens. I'm pretty far away too, good 10, 12 feet probably. I'm projected onto the sensor and I show up very tiny. That's how you get to see this much of me on the screen, right? This much of me does not fit in this tiny little camera, right? Does that make sense to everybody, right? So this is bringing in a huge scene around you and trying to condense it onto this sensor. Now, if you take a lens like this one, this is a true macro lens. Again, I always use the lens hood. They protect the lenses. They do a lot of good. They shelter the, front element from getting light on it. And anyway, we'll get into lens hoods later, but trust me. This is a true macro lens. It says right on here. It's macro. It can get 1-to-1 ratio. So what does that mean? When you're taking a picture here and you zoom in here and you focus to 1-to-1, which is the minimum focusing distance, and you get that bug really close within that minimum right there at that spot, that is truly 1-to-1. So that is making that bug look exactly that big on your sensor. So whatever size sensor you've got in here, that bug shows up exactly same size. These are very cool. Specialty lens, its primary job is to focus really close. So if your subject is this kind of distance away, it's perfect. If your subject is really small, or if you want to zoom into like a finite detail, say you're shooting a saddle maker, right? And they ask you to come to their place of business and shoot some pictures of them making their saddles, and you want this detailed shot, or they've asked for a detailed shot of their leather tooling, and it's this tiny little detail, and you just roll in with a big old lens like this, or you've got this wide angle kind of zoom lens like that, and when you go to get close like that, it can't focus. They just can't focus that close, and so you're having to scoot back, and then you've got this whole wide thing, and then you try to crop, and you waste all these pixels, and it destroys your image. Anyway, it's a mess, right? But if you roll in with one of these guys, or even like there's 180 millimeter, there's other ones that are bigger than this that are even, you know, better. But this one is a fantastic lens. It's only like $900 too. It's not bad. And you can get truly one-to-one, or you can get step back a little bit. If that's too close, you can even back up. I've shot landscapes with this too, and like, you know, it's not macro, but it can focus far too, is my point. But this will let you get those nice details, right? Somebody got a buckle, or they're giving away buckles at the arena that you're at, the event that you're shooting, and they want a detailed shot of that buckle up nice and close. You bring it over to the light and make it look really beautiful, and then you come in nice and tight with one of these. Oh man, they are going to love you forever for that. And it's because you are using a macro lens, very specialty tool, but I've used this to shoot buckles and saddles, and these are real life examples, folks. Very cool to do that sort of a thing. You don't always have to, you know, shoot one-to-one, but these will shoot, you know, get you really close or right there. Okay, let's talk about specialty lenses. Now that macro lens, kind of a specialty lens, but I don't quite put it in this category because these lenses are weird. Okay, these lenses, we probably aren't going to use these much for horse and rodeo photography, but I could see a few use cases here. We're not going to get into all of them, but here's a weird one that is, it's called a tilt shift lens. And you can, if you want more information about this, just reach out, ask me, I'll tell you all about tilt shift lenses. But these are really cool. So these lenses have like a barrel that comes in here, they've got a little joint that comes in here, and then basically, this is a terrible, terrible drawing, oh man. And then it actually like kind of splits, and then it starts again up here, sort of. This is like a really basic, right? But what it's doing, it's kind of complicated. It's not super, super complicated. Kind of complicated how this thing works. But basically, if you have a picture of a building, a big, let's say this is a skyscraper, okay? This really big building, and you have to take a picture of it. If you shoot this with a normal lens, what happens is the top is really tiny and then the bottom is huge. So what this would look like on a normal lens is like this. So if you've shot a building or something and you tried, you're just right across the street. So you have to be close to it, but you shoot this with a normal lens. You're shooting so wide like this to capture the whole scene that you have to tilt back, and then that makes it look like it's leaning back and away from you. But if you use a tilt shift lens, you get nice, perfectly vertical square because you get to crank on some knobs and stuff, and it's the wildest thing when you watch this in action and you actually get to use one. I can't wait to buy one and add it to my collection. I just don't really have like a sound reason to yet, other than I think it's cool and I just want one. Like imagine you had like this big arena, this big building, like a Lazy E commissioned you to do a picture there, right? Of their building, and you just can't get back too far. They've got stuff going on, but they don't want it to be weird and funky, right? They expect a nice square building. And so you take this picture and you got your tilt shift lens, it comes out amazing, everything looks right. What happens in the sense is this a little bit of adjustment here on this knob, but it makes it look like you're shooting from up here. It's the coolest thing. It just takes some adjustments on this knob and it gets you this height adjustment, but you are still on the ground. And it is great. It's perfect for what it does. It's the best thing going if you're shooting pictures of objects like that. But maybe it's not exactly the right tool for horse and rodeo photography, but I want you guys to know because I want you to be informed.